But here's another thing that we have to pay attention to. And this is something that can be quite tricky as well. I'm going to jump over to my little logo right here, and I'm going to apply style to my type. Doesn't matter what it is. I'm going to go to my window menu, choose styles, and I'm going to choose some cool style that I've done. And so there it is. Let's see, what's something cool that I had put in there for myself that I had done. Something crazy. There we go. I got something wacky, crazy like this. I'm going to copy this over to that right there. Really weird style. Now, what's interesting, let me get this. I want to just choose something funky. Because, of course, I haven't looked at these enough. I've seen them like 10,000 times, you know? I want to get some cool, wacky, crazy style here. On here. There we go. Perfect. So I have my nice little frosty bevel and emboss right here. I'm just going to copy this onto my other bird emporium right there. And I realize, it's like, wow, you know, this looks great, and I have these really hard chiseled edges. I have it here, and it just kind of looks like fluffy, limpy, blimpy, and I'm like, you know? It's like, but it's the same thing. It's like, yeah, it is the same thing, and I just don't understand why this doesn't work. Reason why is because something that most people haven't realized is that the styles do not scale to your objects. The style is applied as a style. So check this out. If I go in and I apply this to my bird, I'm going to get what looks like a lot less of a bevel. Doesn't it look like it's a lot more of a bevel on my type? Simply because my type is narrow when it comes to a peak. And I'm like, you know, I have the same style applied, but it clearly looks like 3 different styles. And that's because whenever you apply a style or you change the size of your object, the style is always an absolute size. Because when you look at this and we say do the bevel and emboss here, it's always a certain percentage or a certain number of pixels, regardless of how big or how small your object actually is. So check this out. I'm going to take my bird and I'm going to scale this down, and I'm going to scale it down. I do that and it looks very different because now I see that it looks much more beveled. The bevel and emboss has stayed exactly the same. It's just that my subject matter has changed. So of course, proportions of scale. So what I need to do when I'm putting these on here, if I have a large object, I will need to scale up my layer effects. If I have a small object, like here, I will need to scale it down so that it works. So I'm going to take my bird emporium down here, and I would like to scale down the layer effect so it looks like I have those little bevel and emboss. Right now, the type is so small, it's just crossing right over itself. So again, I'm going to right-click on my effects, and this is where I can go down to the bottom of my right-click menu, and I can scale the effects on here. And I can scale the effects so that I can actually see, and I can get that bevel so that it looks like what I want. It's kind of hard to see there. Let me do it on the bird. Right-click, scale effects. So there it is, and I can make it much bigger. I can make it much smaller here without affecting anything else. So if I want to make it look like it's just as dramatic as here, I can scale that effect way up, like so. So now I get like this super pointy. Or I can scale it way down so it's barely affected if I want to. Same layer effect, it's just that because I'm using absolute measurements in pixels, that if I do it on a really large object, it looks really weird. If I do it on a small object, it can look totally different. This happens with type all the time. People will apply this to type, and all of a sudden, the type is so small, the layer effects just kind of like run right over each other and disappear. You don't see it. So scaling the layer effects is really something you have to do in order to get that same look and feel on your objects, to make them all look consistent. And that's all by going in and just right-clicking on your effects, putting them in, and going right on down like that. So that's another thing that we have to do, is scaling the layer effects. And when I go in, and if I take my type and I were to scale my type here, my layer effects do not scale with me. That's another issue. So when you do this, you have to make sure when you scale any of your objects, you pay attention to this. So when I go into the transform and I'm going to scale my type down, I go into transform, and I begin to scale, what I have to pay attention to is my actual scaling proportions up here in my control bar. Okay? So if I scale my type down to, say, 75%, and I want my layer effects to look exactly the same here, I will need to scale my type and take mental note of that scaling proportion. And then I will need to come back over here to my effects, right-click on it and scale those effects, and make sure that I put in the same amount of scale that I did on my object. Because if I don't, it's going to change. And you can see how much it's going to change if I scale my object very big. My bevel comes totally flat. If I do it really small, then my bevel gets all roundy and weird. So I really have to pay attention to that. If I like that, I have to pay attention. So I scaled it 132%, scale my effects 132, click OK, and now it returns to what I have. Got a question?
Yes. Anytime you're making these changes, is there somewhere that you can save, or do you just have to write it down, like what number you used or where you're at in order to?
Scaling percentages you just have to pay attention to, because it's a two-step process. And most people didn't even know that you had to scale the effects. They think you just put it on there, and then when you change it, it's like everything's fine. No, you don't. So that's one thing you just have to keep a mental note of. That's why I pointed out. So scale it, pay attention to your scale, and then just go ahead and scale it to that.